Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Business Builders Podcast. My name is Tom Borg, along with my colleague, Diane Bogino. We will be talking today about the driving forces assessment. That's one of the tools we use with all of our clients. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Diane. Diane, a little bit about yourself before we start so our audience knows who you are.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be back. I'm Diane Bogino, President of Performance Strategies, and I help people build better careers so they can create better lives.
Outstanding. Thank you. Well, today we want to talk about an assessment we use with our clients called the driving forces. Could you describe what this instrument is all about?
Well, in our last podcast, we talked about DISC and behaviors, and that is how we do things, but the driving forces tells us why we do the things that we do.
Hmm,
And of course, that affects everything that we do, including our decisions, because we're driven by the emotions behind our driving forces.
that's right. And when you get a question from a decision maker, like I get from time to time, well, what do you mean driving forces? Isn't that something like behaviors? That's just, you can tell a person how they're motivated, can't you? Or
No, Tom, and we were just talking about the disc is about observable behaviors. We
mm,
can see someone when they're angry. We know what that looks like. We can see someone when they're being sad. We know what that looks like. But you can't tell what drives a person. So that's way below the iceberg. And
mm,
unless you have a scientifically based assessment, like the driving forces, you would never understand that.
absolutely. Yeah, so often people think, well, I know what motivates him, but maybe what they're doing is they're thinking about what motivates themselves. Let's say the decision maker says, I know what motivates him. He needs more money, or he needs a trophy on his back wall there for his performance. But no, not always the case at all. And one way to
No.
find out, of course, as we know, do a scientifically validated assessment of the driving forces. That's going to reveal all kinds of things. So
Mm.
when we talk about that, what are some of the things that driving forces, well, what does that reveal about a person?
Well, for example, the disc, if you have great communication style, that's really good, but you may not be able to pull somebody to your side of the conversation because you really don't know what motivates them.
Ah,
So you're not able to get to them. Uh, they might be motivated by, as you said a while ago, somebody might be motivated by money. But if you're talking about creating something more an altruistic experience, you're just gonna butt heads.
exactly, exactly. I think that's where a lot of business owners run into trouble when they think they know what motivates a person and it doesn't, or they never take the time to find out. That's probably where they need to start to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah, especially with hiring.
Mm,
If you don't have the person in the right job, that's not going to be a good fit. Again, they may have a good communication style, but if they want to be altruistic and give the store away, don't put them in sales.
absolutely.
It's just not going to work. You're going to go broke.
That's right. In fact, that reminds me of a situation we had with one of my past clients where it was a remodeling company, and the person that was a designer, he was part of the sales call process. And when he'd go out after the sale was made, he would meet with that person to decide what the couple wanted in their home in terms of the renovation, etc. And he had the knack, unfortunately, where he would kind of give away the store on certain things where they'd be ordering certain items, and he would explain to them that a better quality was really necessary in this situation. And they said, well, we can't afford that. I said, well, we can work on a price for you with that. And that was good intentions on his part, but it wasn't helping the company overall because he was a very high a selfless individual.
Mm.
The opposite of selfless, of course, is being resourceful, which is more concerned about the bottom line. So that was creating some issues for the organization where they had to backpedal and say, wait a minute, this estimate is lower than it should have been because now we're going to have to eat some of the costs on this. So that was just one example where it happened with one of my clients. Was there anything that happened in your case with some of your clients?
Yeah, that we had was working with a client who had hired an individual um, and put him in the sales department.
Mm.
But as it turned out, this individual was just really laid back and mild mannered, and the sales department was full of high D's,
Uh-oh.
and it was
That's
just not a good match. It was quite a disaster. And Tom, to your point about talking about this designer, that puts a company in a position where they're over promising but under delivering, and
mm-hmm.
that will ruin your reputation in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. It upsets the client, that's for sure. Nobody likes to be, from their perception, taken advantage of. And that wasn't the intention, but sometimes that was how it came across.
Right.
That's the interesting thing about it. You mentioned that in that sales department, we had a number of people that were high achievers, they were driven to get those sales. And then you have a person on the opposite end of the spectrum. Talk about how that causes conflict where you have differing values.
That's right, because that's a barrier to communication because you're not reaching the other person and understanding what their agenda is and what they want as an outcome of any situation and what they're trying to achieve. So if you're trying to achieve two different purposes, obviously it just isn't going to work. And
Mm-hmm.
the other interesting thing, Tom, is that each of these driving forces reacts differently to crisis.
Ah, tell me more about that.
Well, if something is going wrong in a company on a team, and again, each person has a different driving force, they're going to react differently. Like one person might be terribly frustrated by other people's agendas or driving forces, but not realizing why or understanding where the other person's coming from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When that happens, that's where I think people kind of get very impatient with the other person when they don't understand what's really happening. They don't understand the other person. So I know with myself, it's like if someone pushed a button. Say, don't you get it? I mean, what you're doing is wrong. And not realizing they're operating from a different perspective. They got a different set of values than the ones I have, and you can't do that. That's going to create this friction, and that's very detrimental to an organization. We have that kind of infighting going on, and they're not even understanding why that it's happening.
Right, right. You've got people who are might be high utilitarian and they want to watch every penny, where you've got the selfless person who wants to be generous with everything. But Tom, in business today and in life,
Yeah,
the extremes of those never work.
no, 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 and it even works in the world of consulting. You look at a client who just doesn't have the budget to work with the consultant. Uh, no, unfortunately, you can't help them.
Hmm.
I suggest get a good book. It's a good place to start. If you don't have the money, get a good book and do some self-learning there. But you're right, and that's where expectations, when they're not understood, it can cause a tremendous amount of misunderstanding.
Yes.
Uh, so more about the driving forces. What are some of the other driving forces? We talked about utilitarian, which consists of the resourceful, which is the person that's motivated towards return on investment, and the selfless
Mm.
person is motivated more towards just giving away more than they really receive because they just want to do the job right. They feel it has to be completed and they'll do whatever it takes in terms of their own time and effort, but not necessarily get fairly compensated for it. What are some of the other areas that we have of those 12 driving forces?
Well, the theoretical, this is the individual who loves learning. And
Mm,
this might be the individual that wants to take the time out to study everything about a project, every step, every nuance, whereas the utilitarian is like, what?
mhm.
Let's get going. So this again causes conflict and
Yeah,
crisis. And the high theoretical might say, well, that's because you didn't take time to study the situation. You know how
yeah.
that goes.
Sure. And then you have the other type of person who goes on their gut instinct, right? Or past experiences, and they just don't have the time to research it. They don't, not only that, they don't feel like
Right.
that's necessary. They trust themselves before they go out and research a bunch of new things that may or may not be true. So yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah,
Other part
right.
that comes in. Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So it's really essential to understand each of these and how they interact with the behaviors as well, because,
Yes.
Tom, so many, I have a client that only wants to use the disc, and the disc is great.
Mhm.
But again, it doesn't take you deep enough into understanding your team and how each individual works and who is the best individual for each project.
Good
If you
point.
don't have the right people on a project, they may be in different departments or whatever. You've got to be flexible. Um, and this is something that we talked about in one of our earlier podcasts about the flexibility in companies being agile today. This is one of the things helping understand and mixing those behaviors and motivators on the projects for people that helps keep a company agile.
Hmm. Yes, and that's important. We may mention this in the last podcast, but these things all play together. You have your behaviors, you have driving forces, you have the EQ, and there's even other assessments that measure other things. But these are all part of that picture. You can't just say, okay, I understand the person's behavioral style. I know everything about them. That's like was it the five blind men and the elephant? One grabs the leg and oh, it's like a tree trunk. Other one grabs the ear and says, oh, it's like a tent. And you can't get the whole picture by looking just at one aspect of the person. So that's why it's important to see how the person is put together and how some things will balance out other things. They may be a high D or high driven type person, but when it comes to the motivators, they are more of a collaborative type of a person where they want to see the team get the credit for what's going on. And they'll lead, but from the middle of the pack.
Right. Yeah,
Things
exactly.
we need to
And
understand about it. But go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, well, I don't know what that was. Uh, something just dropped. Sorry, folks. Um, the other thing is how driving forces are attached to emotions. And today, um, people don't understand how some things affect people differently. And that takes some understanding and patience, which a lot of people don't have in the workplace today, and they say they don't have time to understand it.
Mm,
But you've got to have a good HR department, or at the very least, a good EPA program in place to help people cope with their different driving forces and how things affect emotions surrounding those.
mhm,
So something's going to affect a utilitarian differently than it does an altruistic or a selfless individual.
mhm,
Um, and that is still part of what came out of COVID, of course, where people were so deeply affected with that. And, Tom, all our experiences, all our education, of course, affects both our behaviors and our driving forces.
mhm,
So it really takes a great deal of understanding to ferret out how all of those things play into an individual's makeup and the reactions that you get in a workplace with so many demands, so many different people. I mean, particularly in a large company, but in a small company, there's often no way to get away or take a break, or maybe you can't even walk outside. It depends, but
mhm.
there's so many things to consider. It seems almost impossible to do, but if you just take a moment and use these assessment and try to understand it, it will give you the tools that you need to cope with all the many things going on in the world today.
Absolutely right. Yeah, we don't realize that it's a holistic setup in your organization. There's so many things affecting your culture within your organization. You need to pay attention to these things and at the same time address them when you can identify what needs to be addressed, because otherwise it just festers. People, the whole other discussion we had in the past, disengagement starts to kick in, right? Where a person just feels they're not understood, they're not going to change, they don't want our opinions. So they just resign themselves to show up for work, do what they need to do, but not much more, and then go home.
Yeah, the culture, like you said, Tom, is very important because today, I
Mhm.
mean, every workplace is full of different cultures,
Oh, yeah.
different ages, different backgrounds and educational levels. So there is a lot to understand and to cope with. But as I say, take the time to do it. It'll be well worth it and increase your profitability and your efficiency.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I was just reading the other day, there's 7 generations in a workplace today. There's
Mm,
7 generations.
yes, yes,
It's amazing. So you think about culture. Yes, culture is all important, and boy, it's more complex than it ever has been before. So we need to step back and assess what needs to be done and look around for some solutions that'll help make that happen.
absolutely.
Absolutely. Hey, think about the rest of that, the driving forces. So I like the other one there, that harmonious, or uh, yeah, is it the the surroundings? That's how we call it, the surroundings.
Oh, yeah,
Harmonious,
yeah.
and then of course the objective. So the harmonious type of a person likes to have things it's 2 ways. They like to have a physical nice surroundings. Uh, they like to have a window in most cases. They like to have their office neat and in order. They like to have it that they're not in the main thoroughfare of everything that happens in the organization. They like to be where they can have their quiet space. I was with a company some years ago, and they had the customer relations director. Yeah, it was in this manufacturing company, and they dealt with a lot of the sales through their clients. And she had a nice window, and she loved it. Now she was a high harmonious individual, high I like to get out as far as her behaviors and be with her team. But when they made some changes within the organization, they decided that someone else was going to get that window office. They put her down the hall in this room. I had been in a few times, no windows, and on a thoroughfare where people were walking back and forth, back and forth. And it was just not for her. Here is a woman that loved to talk about her plants, which she had in her other office with windows, and how she loved to garden at home, etc. And you can guess she did not last long at that company. She soon left.
Mm, yeah,
So they weren't paying attention to the surroundings for this individual. Now, it's not just the physical surrounding; it's also psychological, right? You
absolutely.
want to say a few
Uh,
things about the psychological harmony that needs to exist in certain places.
Yeah, so people are like that individual would not be cut out to work in a hectic organization where things are just bustling and hustling all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's important, number one, for if you're looking for a job, for example, to check out the company beforehand and see exactly what the job entails, what the culture is of the workplace, and
Mm-hmm.
exactly what that job, what you're going to be doing every day, because that can lead to a high stress level. Now, some people don't mind the chaos, and that's totally different.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to understand that about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, I suppose we could say, Tom, that each of us bears some responsibility as well in understanding ourselves and helping ourselves to work better and understanding the atmosphere that we're going to be in to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it's a two-way street. It's just not all on the employer's shoulders. That person needs to have the awareness, that the employee needs to have the awareness to recognize what makes them happy, what's going to help them be the most productive individual, and to communicate that to the powers that be. Now, sometimes that's not so easily done. Am I right? You've got an authoritarian type of an environment of leadership, and they just assume they know what needs to be done, what's best for everyone, and unless that individual speaks up, it's not going to happen. And again, back to disengagement, it starts to set in where a person doesn't feel they're being listened to, or they're not being able to use their potential, and it gets to a place where it's not the most productive place to
Yeah,
be for anyone.
yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, it's again goes back to basic communication and understanding who you're speaking with. Some people can't take high demands that are put on them. It's not that they're not good workers or don't want to do a good job, but there are different ways to speak to different people and still get your message across. Um, Again, everybody knows that sales is high demand and
Mhm,
quick action,
mhm,
whereas a charitable organization might be totally different. And that's not to say that somebody that's back to behaviors again is a high D can't work in a charitable organization, because one of their driving forces could very well be
mhm.
selfless in some high aspect.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's the nice thing about this. You start to talk about the whole person. You can see where one area balances out the other. And yeah, initially, a person may not seem fitted for the position, but when you look at the whole picture, there's some really important ingredients they do bring to the table, and that does make them a good fit for that position.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think if we were to summarize what we were talking about here today to wrap it up, what would be one piece of advice you'd have for our listeners as they tune into this discussion?
It's worth taking the time to assess individuals using these tools to help your organization grow, be profitable, and be efficient, because communication and understanding are what drives us all, so to speak.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, if our listeners can get one good idea of it, that would be one right there. I might add that if you really want to do a good job of growing your company, start with growing your people. That's what we're talking about here. That's it's got to pay the best dividends.
Absolutely, Tom.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on our next podcast. And until then, make it a good day, because if you don't make it, somebody else will.